We're up to Yud Bet, Amud Bet. If you're following in the art scroll, it's 12b2. And we are at the Mishnah, right at the beginning of the wide lines. Says the Mishnah, Averu elu velo na'anu. So let's say the first of those fasts that we declared, the first three fasts that are done for the private people, for the Sadiqim of the town, they fast. And unfortunately, we didn't have rain yet. Bedin gozrin gimel ta'anuyot aherot ala tzibur. They come with three more ta'aniyot, but this time on the community. Now, we're going to read that these actually are stepped up from the ones before. Ochlim v'shotim miba'od yom. They eat and they drink before in the afternoon, but they stop eating and drinking before nightfall. So this fast, what kind of fast is it similar to? It's a Yom Kippur type fast, to a Tisha B'Av type fast. So they stop eating in the afternoon before nightfall. V'asurim b'melacha, and it's asur for a person to do work on that day. Uberhaitza, and washing, b'sicha, and in using oils, b'nilat sandal, and putting on leather shoes. B'tashmish hamita, and in being in intimacy between man and his wife. V'no'alin et mechatzaot, and they close, not only is it asur b'melacha, but they also close the bathhouses, because we said asur b'rehitza, you're not allowed to wash. Avru elu, so we get 3 ta'anits. We're going to schedule 3 ta'anits on the tzibur that are now going to be the stricter kind of ta'anit. Avru elu v'lo na'anu. What happens if now we've done the first 3 that we said earlier, that we covered earlier, the dates that the Mishnah brought? Then we did 3 more, and it still didn't work. More strict. Avru elu v'lo na'anu. Bedin gozin aleim od sheva. Bedin comes along and they say 7 more. This is the beginning of intermittent fasting, by the way. They're like, okay, guys, just fast every day. 7 more fasts. Shehen, in total, what do we have? The 6 before, plus these 7. Shehen Yud Gimel Taanit, Ta'anuyot, ala Sibur. So there's 13 different fasts that the Sibur already did. Hare elu yiterot ala rishonot. These, the last tranche, are more strict than the ones before. What do we do on these? Sheba'elu, on these matri'in, they blow the shofar, they call out in tefillah, v'no'alin et hanuyot, and they close up the stores, because as we said, asurim melacha, always bothered me. How come over here in the second part of the Mishnah, we say, no'alim et hanuyot, and earlier on it says, we don't say no'alim et hanuyot, when I learned the Mishnayot, right? The first time also says asur melacha. So if when you're not allowed to wash, we close the bathhouse. So when you're not allowed to work, you should close the businesses. Correct?
Yes.
We'll see the answer to that already.
Except.
Sorry?
Except.
We accept what?
Except they opened it on...
towards the end. Besheni matin im chashecha.
Is this for everyone or only the rabbis?
No, this is the tzibur now. Now we're in tzibur territory. Yes. Basheni matin im chashecha. On a Monday, because remember we do Mondays and Thursdays generally. That was the day that they came in to this from the villages. They came to the main cities those were the market days. Basheni matin im chashecha. On the Monday, they would open up a little bit im chashecha once it was already starting to get dark, so they could buy food to break the fast. Ubachamishi mutarim nekvor Shabbat. And on the Thursday, it would be open the whole day. Why? Because they needed to prepare for Shabbat, they needed to go shopping. In general, one of the reasons why the stores over here are closed, so this already gives you, the end of the Mishnah gives you the answer to the question we asked earlier. What's the answer? The answer is, No'alim, we close the chanuyot, the stores. It's not because you're not allowed to buy food, it's because we don't want people walking past the food stores when they have to fast and all the food is out. It's very difficult. Right? So therefore we close the stores. What's the proof of that? You see that the way we keep them open is based on the need of the people to buy the food. Okay?
So there was zero assimilation back then.
Sorry?
There was it sounds like we don't want to tempt people to, see food. So that means everyone in their village was Jewish completely. Like there was no one else that wasn't.
In the Jewish towns, unfortunately, some of this concept of this assimilation that you speak of wasn't really driven by assimilation. It was driven by the fact that they would lock the Jews in some form of a ghetto, right? Or, right, the Jews lived all together in Israel, or the Jews were exiled from Israel to Babel. So in all these cases, the Jews were forced into a situation, except for Israel, which was in their land, they were forced into a situation where they will be living in an area which was exclusively Jewish. Okay?
Makes sense.
Let's carry on. The Mishnah continues, and the Mishnah says, Avru elu v'lo na'anu, Shema Yisrael. We've now done 13 fasts, progressively worse, progressively more strict. Avru elu v'lo na'anu. If we still didn't get an answer, mima'atim b'masa'u matan. We would decrease, we'd slowly let them do less shopping. They come, bring up a chair. We would slowly bring down the ability of people to do masa'u matan, which means to do business, even if it was unrelated to food. Bibinyan ubinitiyah. We would ask people to decrease in planting fields and building new homes, be'erusin u'benisuin, in engagements and in marriages.
That's loosening up on those restrictions?
No, we're tightening up.
Decreasing them.
We're tightening up. U'b'she'elat shalom ben adam bechavero, and in greeting one another. Why would you think that that's an issue? You know what the answer is? Because when a person's avel, they're not allowed to greet. That's supposed to greet. So we're showing elements and signs of mourning, or a time of such stringency that we're not allowing people. I think also there's another issue here, and we'll come back to it again in the Gemara. But there's another issue here as well. Sometimes you have people. Let's say you have a person in the community. We said who's not engaging in the suffering of the community. He has enough water. His name is Shlomo Poland Springs Towel. The guy owns all the water. You don't have a problem with water. He doesn't feel the Taanit. He doesn't feel these tightening of the belts. He doesn't care if the store's open. He's a wealthy guy. So when you create this last set of restrictions, now you're including everybody. Now the guy who wants to get married, he's praying his guts out. The guy who needs to do business, even though he's a millionaire, he's more addicted to his work than the guy who's barely making it, who's flipping burgers, right? You tell the guy he can't go to his office, forget about it, he's dying. Tell the guy he can't go to the gym, can't handle it. Just look at de Blasio. Okay.
Increasing the sanctions.
Increasing sanctions, exactly. Tightening the belt. Now you can't join the Olympics. Okay. Why do we do all this? Rather, what do? How do we treat the new reality that we find ourselves in unprecedented times? Kibnei Adam hanizufin lamakom, like people who were outcast by Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Nazuf means a person was pushed away, rejected. Hayichidim, the singles. What do we mean yichidim? The individuals, the distinguished people, the chachamim, the tzaddikim, chozrim mit'anim. They return back to their fasting ways. Ad sheyetzeh Nisan, until the end of Nisan. At the end of Nisan, it's already spring. So now we're in a situation where it's not the rainy season anymore. That's when they stop. Yatzah Nisan.
Even if it didn't rain.
Even if it didn't rain, because now there's no more rain in Israel. So now to fast in the summer months, we'll talk about that too. Is it pointless? Maybe they should pray for a miracle. Do you rely on a miracle? Okay. Yatzah Nisan v'yadu Gshamim. What happens if after Nisan came, Geshem came, if you turn back to Bit Amud Aleph, what did we say there? It's a sign of a curse when it rains when it's not supposed to be there. So therefore, for us to pray and to fast for something that's a siman kilala, Yatzah Nisan v'yadu Gshamim, siman kilala, it's a sign of a kilala, shneimar, halo ketzir hitim hayom. Today is the time of ketzir hitim. So therefore, we're not fasting and praying and doing all that in order to be able to do it. But this idea, again, there's a lot of things that were left open-ended in the Mishnah that the Gemara is going to deal with. What does it mean that they go back to fasting? They go back to fasting when? They go back to fasting how much? Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, Bishlema kulhu itbahu ta'anug. When it comes to all of these things, right, I understand that you're going to make them asur. Why? Because there's some element of enjoyment. Ta'anug. Okay? It's a oneg. Rechitza, v'sicha, v'tashmisha mita. We get it. Aval melacha tzarhu. But to tell a person that they can't do any work, that's tzar. So in other words, there's a baseline. This is a need, not a want. So why are you making melacha asur? This is just something that a human being needs to do in order to have his parnassah. So why did they say that the melacha should also be asur? Remember when we added all the restrictions in the second set of fasts? The Gemara answers, Amar Rav Hizda, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rav Hizda said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Kadeshu som, Kir'u atzara. Kadeshu som means Kadesh. All the time we assume the word Kodesh means holy. But the word Kodesh or Kedusha also means something which is separate. Okay? So Kadeshu Tzom means separate a fast, set aside, make it different from your ordinary day. Kadeshu Tzom, Kir'u atzara. Get ready to call the people together. Isfu zekenim. Take all the elders, all the tzaddikim, and bring them together. So, what are we learning from this pasuk? The Gemara continues. Ka'atzeret. If you told me, kadeshu tzom kir'u atzara, call it a gathering. So we're going to learn from a gathering what you should do at this event. Ma'atzeret. Just like on Atzeret, which is, we call 2 holidays are called Atzeret. Which 2 holidays? Shemini Atzeret. Good. What's the other one? Shabuot is also called Atzeret. So those 2 days are called Atzeret, just like Atzeret in Torah. Asur ba'asiyat melacha. You're not allowed to do any work. Af ta'anit. Asur ba'asiyat melacha. Also ta'anit is asur for a person to do work. So we learned from the fact that the Navi says, Kadshu Tzom Kir'u Atzara, that when you set aside a fast, it has the name of Atzeret, of a gathering. And just like Atzeret in the Torah is considered to be a day of lack of work, literally the word Atzeret actually also means to stop. Like if you see a stop sign in Israel, it says on it, Atzor, right? So Atzeret means to stop. Stop what? Stop working. So therefore, Kir'u Atzara, call it a day of stopping to work. And just like those days are Asur Melacha, so too are the fasts that we call on the Sibur a stopping of work. Okay, if that's the case, says the Gemara, if that's the case, Ima Atzeret Me'urta, then just like Atzeret comes Me'urta from the evening before, just like all the holidays, Af Taanit Nambi Me'urta. So the Taanit also should be from the night before. Amar Rab Zera, Ledidi Mifarshele, according to me, I explain it, Mineh to Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. I explain it according to the words of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Sorry. Amar Kara, the pasuk says, Isfuz kenim, right? Gather the zekenim, right? So what are we comparing the Kir'u Atzeret to the gathering of the Isfuz kenim? Dumya da asifat zekenim. Ma asifat zekenim bayom. Just like when the zekenim come together, is only in the daytime. Avtzom, also the fast is nami bayom. Also the fast is by the day. Now, just to be clear, what is the Gemara's proof against the first understanding? It says it should be from the evening, right? But the truth is, we already said that it's from the evening. They stop eating and drinking from the night before. The Gemara's question was, though, in the laws of Melacha, we only said that's Asur in the daytime. If you're comparing it and learning it from Shmini Atzeret, so just like the holiday begins at the night, you can't work Shmini Atzeret evening, so also it should be the full 25 hours, and that the Mishnah never said. So if that's the case, how could you learn it from there? He answers, so no, we're not learning it from like a Gzerah Shava, from a comparison of the words Atzeret, Atzeret. We're not saying it's like the holiday Atzeret, but rather we're saying that the atzeret, the stopping of work, kir'u tzom, kadeshu tzom, kir'u atzara, sof zekenim, isfu zekenim, gather the elders. When do the elders gather? When's that time? That time they gather in the morning. Now it's interesting because Rashi, if you look at Rashi for 1 second, look at Rashi on the side. Rashi says, isfu zekenim, dibalayla kol echad beto ve'enan nesafim. The elders, when do they gather? They only gather during the daytime. If I had not seen the words of Rashi, I would have understood the Gemara a little bit differently. Because isfu zekenim, the gathering of the elders, it could mean when do they gather, or it could mean also, what do the elders gather for? Zekenim.
Food.
No, when do the elders get together? The tzaddikim, the rabbis.
Bayom.
What do they get together for?
To learn, to fast.
Generally, not in a fast. Bedin.
Oh.
Bedin. And the halacha is that Bedin does not meet at night. So I learned isfu zekenim. I didn't see it like Rashi says it. Rashi seems to say like, okay, they don't only gather during the day.
Isn't it a moot point? People usually don't work at night.
No, but that's not the point. Because that way, it's just like, and it's a happenstance. Here it's in Danin, we don't have a halakha, with Betin does not, they don't gather, not allowed to, people say halakha at nighttime. Okay? So that would have been a very specific, but I'm not sure, Rashi does not see it that way. Okay. Ve'ema, Ve'ema mitiara, says the Gemara, okay, now you want to say that the halakha begins already at nightfall. Ve'ema mitiara. So if that's the case, when do they generally get together, these zikenim? They get together in the afternoon, right? Amar, so also the prohibition, the difficulty, the isur against working should also be set mitiara from that time, from earlier, because that's when they actually gather. Not when they finish gathering, but when they start to gather. Amar Rav Shesha b'rei Rav Idi, Rav Shesha says, in the name of Rav Idi, Misaya lele Rav Huna, we see from here a proof a proof to Rav Huna, de Amar mitzafra kinufya. When do we start the fast? Already from the morning. On the morning of the fast day, that's when everyone gathers to the Beit HaKnesset, and that's where all these laws begin to apply. Okay, now, if that's the case, I want to point this out. Misaya le Rav Huna, let's look at Rashi. That's a proof according to Rav Huna. The Amar mitzafra kinufaya. Biyom Taanit Sibur mitkabtzinu ba'il Beit HaKnesset min haboker. He held that everyone has to come already get together for the praying, for the fasting. They have to come in the morning. Because since we're seeing that the asifat zekenim, when does that begin to happen? They get together in the morning. They don't come together in the afternoon right before Shekiah. So then all these halachot should apply from an earlier time if you're learning it from asifat zekenim. Okay, says the Gemara. Hechi avdi. So what do we do when they all come to the Beit HaKnesset, when everyone comes together and they gather? What do we do? What's the schedule? What's the process? What's the timetable? Amar Abaye says, Mitzafra ad palga de yoma, from the morning until half of the day goes by, me'ayinin b'mili demata. We look through all the issues, everything that's going on in the town. Mikan ve'elech riv'iyaya de yoma. From that time afterwards, okay, Karinan b'sifra ve'aftarta. They read from the Sefer Torah, they read from the Haftarah, Mikan va'elech, after that into the final quarter. So you have the first half, the third quarter, and then the fourth quarter. What happens in the fourth quarter? Mikan va'elech ba'inan rachameh. So just like in football, the fourth quarter is the time for the Hail Mary, so too, fourth quarter is the time for the prayers. Just not barminan to anyone but God. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Vayakumu al omdam," and they all stood al omdam on the place that they used to stand. Vayikra'u b'sefer Torah Elohem, and they called they read out in the book of Hashem their God. Revi'it ayom, v'revi'it mitvadin, and on the for a quarter of the day, and the quarter of Revi'it mitvadim u'mishtachavim laHashem Eloheim. They would pray and they would give praise and give thanks to Hashem their God. So you see explicitly in the pasuk says in Nehemiah that they would that this is the schedule for the day of fasting. Epoch Ana. Says the Gemara, 1 second. That's what you think they would do? Go through the issues of the town, try to fix the things up, try to make appropriate changes, and then read the Torah and the Haftarah, and then pray? Epoch Ana. I'm going to switch it up. Lo salka daitach. No, don't think that you could switch the order, that they should pray first, then do Sefer and Haftarah, and then do the issues of the day, okay? Rather, right, don't think that that's what you should. Lo salka daitach. Don't let that, salka means something that comes into daitach, into your mind, okay? Dichtiv, because the pasuk says, ve'elai asefu ko haret. And to me gathers, right, all the people that are trembling. The word haredim, where does it come from? Today it's used the people say it in a derogatory way sometimes. The Charedim just means they're trembling. They're full of fear of heaven. They want to make sure they do everything exactly the right way. The pasuk says, "Ve'elai asefu ko hared," and to me gather all the people who are trembling. B'divrei Elohei Yisrael, in the words of the God of Israel, al ma'al hagolah, regarding and about ma'al, from the word me'ilah, when people they made the avon, they used me'ilah is used usually with regard to a person who is using the objects of the Beit HaMikdash for their own personal use. But also can mean a person that is mutinous. They don't respond, they don't listen to the commandment, like Moed B'melech, a person who doesn't do what the commandments of their God or of their king. Uchtiv in the pasuk says, "Ubminchat ha'erev kamti mita'aniti," and from the afternoon of the evening, right? Kamti mita'aniti, I got up from my fast. Ve'efresa kapi el Hashem. So you see that the prayer, where does it land up? The prayer lands up at the end of the day, almost right before the person's going to break their fast. So you don't think that you should pray first. Now, just interesting. Why did the Gemara say ve'epoch ana? Let me switch it. How come? So it's interesting. The Gemara doesn't bring a reason why we should think that we would do the opposite. Just like it just says, let's do the opposite. So maybe the Gemara is asking so that we get the answer. But I think there's something deeper in the Gemara's answer. So Rashi says, as an example, the palga diyom akama, in the first half of the day, havukaru maftirei ubar rachameh beidach palga me'aini. They should flip it to the first half being prayer and reading Torah, and the second half let them look at the issues. You know, Tosafot also epochana pirush denema palga kamaita diyom matzu ubar rachameh beidach palga me'aini b'mili demata b'shani lo sakadaitach. Tosafot, Rashi, they both say the same thing. Maybe the opposite. But I was thinking, we know that Kabbalistically, the morning is a time of Rahamim. The afternoon, Minha, evening, is a time of Deen. One of the reasons why we don't give tzedakah at night, why we don't ideally pray at night, right? You don't do Tehillim at night, is because it's a time of judgment. So we want to schedule those things at the most appropriate time, at the most opportune time, not at the least opportune time. Obviously, in a scenario, you don't have an option, do that. But perhaps the Gemara's epochana is not just asking randomly, let's do the opposite, but like, why in the world would you spend the time of Rahamim looking over the issues of the city, and the time of Deen pray and do the Sefer Torah in the morning, do the other stuff in the afternoon, when anyway, it's not a time of Rahamim.
Could it be based on that you do it in the morning if there is negative stuff that they find when they're analyzing, that there is rachamim on them, if as they're examining the town's situation, if there's bad stuff that they find, that there is rachamim
on those negative things.
Negative things that they find because it's the morning.
So I want to just, instead of it being a svara, because the Gemara, if that went into the question, so it had to be that the answer of the Gemara is answering that point. So let's just look for 1 second at the pasuk that the Gemara uses to disprove the epochana. So if I'm right that that's hidden behind the logic of the question, let's look at what he says. Ve'elai asefu kochared, and to me gathers all those that are trembling. B'divrei Elohei Yisrael al ma'ala gola, in the words of Hashem, for all the transgressions, all the mistakes that they made. U'minchat ha'erev kamti mita'aniti ve'efresa kapai el Hashem. And in the afternoon, then already I raise my hands in prayer. So when you first read it, if you understand epochana is just a random flip, then you just see from the pasuk that that's what Ezra did. Okay? Okay, Pseder, Hazak Baruch. I think what the pasuk is saying is more than that. What the pasuk is saying is, the first thing that I had to do was teshuvah. You don't ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for rahamim when you still have the avel b'kapav. It's called tovel sheretz biyado. When you dip in the mikveh and you're still holding on to the dead animal that's making you tameh. You want to become tahor, you hold your eyes, Hashem, please. You're spreading your hands in prayer, and you still have the avel b'kapayim. So the bringing the pasuk from Ezra is not a random answer. It's relating to the issues of the city as ma'ala gola, as the transgressions against Divrei Elohei Yisrael. After I have those hands, what do we keep going back to? The pasuk says, "Mi ya'aleh b'haram v'nai min yakum makom kodsho." Who's going to come onto the mountain of God? Niki kapayim, a person with clean hands. Once I've cleaned my hands, Niki kapayim, then ve'efresa kapay, then I could spread my hands. So although it would be in terminology of rahamim, it would be better to pray in the morning. But if we're making terrible mistakes that need to be fixed in the city, there are problems, there's no mechitza in the Beit HaKnesset. There are problems with kashrut in the town. There's problems with people stealing from one another. There's problems with people throwing yatomim almanot on the street because they can't pay their rent. If those things are not fixed, then how am I going to come and ask for rahamim? So the Gemara is telling us, using this pasuk, that that's what's going on here. That's how I'm understanding what the Gemara is saying. Okay? The Gemara continues. Amar Rab Rafram. Excuse me. Amar Rafram Bar Papa. Rafram Bar Papa says, Amar Rab Chizda. In the name of Rab Chizda. I always love this. Because when you do the Masechet, when you finish the Masechet, you mention all the different people of Bar Papa. Rami Bar Papa, Rafram Bar Papa. One of the Bar Papas that you mention when you do a Siyum Masechet is Rafram Bar Papa. It mentions all these wonderful there's people that had a family where the whole family was tzaddikim with Talmidei Chachamim, right? And we're praying that our family should also have that. So we mention this family that has all these Torah scholars as children of the family. So over here you have Rafram Bar Papa. You don't find Rafram Bar Papa so often spread out throughout the Gemara, right? So it's nice to hear the person that we're going to mention in the Siyum Be'ezrat Hashem. Amar Rafram Bar Papa Amarav. Rafram Bar Papa said in the name of Rav Chizda, Kol Shuhu Mishum Evel, everything which is comes because of mourning, Kigon Tisha B'Av. Ve'evel Asur Ben Mechamin Ben Mitzonan. The Gemara says, Rafram Bar Papa teaches, right? Any fast where a person is not allowed to do the things that we mentioned, specifically over here it's talking about the washing using rechitza. So anytime where the fast has elements of avelut, like I mentioned when we talked about saying hello. So then Kigon Tisha B'Av, which Tisha B'Av is a day of avelut, right? Va'avel, and specifically, of course, in an actual case of mourning, not just something which is like mourning, but is actual mourning. Asur be'mechamim be'mitzonan. You're not allowed to wash with warm water or with hot water. Why are we telling you this, by the way? It's interesting to know. Whenever we learn about rechitza, not with regards to avelut, in general, rechitza means in warm to hot water. So let's say on Shabbat, a person is not allowed to wash rechitza. But that isur is on warm and hot water. If you want to wash yourself with cold water, that's not part of rechitza. So if a person was to take a cold shower on Shabbat, that's not part of the gezerah of rechitza. The only potential problem with taking a shower with cold water on Shabbat, if it's not considered rechitza, because that's not what the Chachamim meant when they said rechitza with regards to Shabbat, would be the drying off, the towel, the, etc., squeezing your hair, all the other issues that might arise from something like that, okay? But rechitza in general is only in hot water. That's what the Chachamim meant. Says Rafram Bar Papa and then Rav Chizda, when it comes to avelut, it's hot water or cold water. Koshu mishum ta'anug, but what we're talking about is the isur of ta'anug, where we did not want you to have comfortable life, an enjoyable experience, and that was the aim of the ta'anit, just not to be enjoying, so we were kind of getting rid of things that were above the baseline, as opposed to avelut, where we even go below the baseline. Kegon ta'anit tzibur, like a regular public fast. Bechamin asur, it's asur to wash bechamin with warm water, right? Betzonan mutar, but with cold water it's mutar. Now it's important to mention, what are we talking about over here with a public fast? We're referring to a public fast where there was an isur of rechitza.
The stricter
Yeah, the stricter set. So it's a stricter set, but not avelut. Right? Otherwise, we didn't say asur rechitza. Yeah, okay?
Well, there's no washing at all. You don't have to say rechitza, right?
Sorry?
No warm or cold water when you're avel.
On the avel. Right. When it's not avelut, but we try to make asur things of ta'anug, so then we differentiate between warm water and cold water. Okay. The Gemara then continues and is trying now to prove this point. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin. Rav Idi bar Avin said, Af anan nami tanina. Also we learned the Braita just like this. A Mishnah, excuse me. We learned the Mishnah just like this. The Mishnah we just learned says that we close off the merchatzaot. So what do we prove from no'alin to merchatzaot?
You could wash with cold water.
Yeah. No, but we're locking the merchatzaot.
Yeah, but that's hot water.
Yes.
Bathhouses were heated to make
yes,
hot water.
They were, and not necessarily hot, but even warm. So the no'alim, from the fact that they locked the bathhouses, you learn what the halakha is with regards to the cold water. Okay? Now, what's interesting to me is understanding the proof of the Gemara. Because that's an inference, which is a hard inference to swallow. Now you lock the bathhouse because it has hot water. Who says that you wouldn't have locked the bathhouse that had cold water? You just didn't have one. So it's a hard proof to understand.
Also, other places you could bathe,
What do you do? Lock the river?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no opportunity to do it.
Yeah, but it's cold.
No, I'm saying the only proof would be, you could only prove something from the fact that the Mishnah didn't say to do something that is feasible or that was an option. So they didn't have cold bathhouses. So from the fact that they locked the bathhouse, maybe really it's asur warm and cold. There was just no cold bathhouses. And the only cold water that you could dip in, which is the river or the well, you can't lock that. Right? So it's hard to understand exactly what the Gemara's proof is from the No'alim. Right? Okay.
And mikvahs were cold.
Sorry?
Mikvahs were cold.
What do you mean? No, they would have the same way they would be Noel, the same way they would warm the bathhouses, they could also warm the mikvaot. Today, our mikvaot are very warm. If you go to a men's mikveh, Shema Yisrael, they make it sometimes 100 degrees, 110 degrees. You can't walk in. They used to have in Israel, they had the hot bor and the cold bor. I would always go to the hot bor.
It's health reasons.
Shema Yisrael, all those people in the cold bor. At least over here, there's maybe killing the thing. Then someone told me, Rabbi, it's worse. Why? Because unless the water's boiling, the better for germs. Bacterial is when it's warm, less than boiling, but warm.
Chlorine in it at all?
They do put chlorine in it, but again, the amount of people that are going Erev Yom Kippur to the thing, I think they're canceling out the chlorine.
Better off in the ocean.
Okay? So again, it's a little bit difficult to understand how the Gemara understood that as a proof. Amale Abaye, right? Says the Gemara, exactly this point. See, but this is what I'm trying to get you to do, and I think you caught it right away, that it's not a proof. Amar Abaye said, Itzonan Asur, if Itzonan is Asur, right? So then, Sochnit and Naharot, what would it have said? Lock the rivers? You can't lock the rivers. So you can't prove from the fact that it says lock the bathhouses. We just lock the bathhouses because that's where people normally take a bath. So Abaye,
You can't learn that you can bathe in cold water because you can't lock the rivers.
exactly. And there were no cold bathhouses.
Interesting.
So therefore, Abaye says, I don't like your proof. It doesn't prove anything. Okay? Amar, this is again, the process of Gemara, you're picking it up, Ray, and I think Nathan also. You're picking it up if when the Gemara brings a proof, you're like, that doesn't work because of this. Then the Gemara says, that doesn't work because of this. Right. Okay? Excellent. Amar Rav Shesha bered Rav Idi, Rav Shesha bered Rav Idi, who clocked in, before. He said, Abba, my father, Achi Kashele, he had this problem with the Mishnah. Michdi. Let's see. Let's understand. Tanan Asur B'Rechitza, it says in the Mishnah that you're not allowed to wash. You're not allowed to wash. No alina de B'Rechatzaot. Okay? So then, why do you need to tell me that you lock the bathhouses?
If you say you're not allowed to wash.
If you tell me you're not allowed to wash. So you're not allowed to wash however you would wash. Lamali el alav shma mina bechamin asur betzonen mutar. So he understood not from the fact that it proves it, but from the fact it was unnecessarily added.
Nothing's unnecessarily added. It's added.
You're saying
Since it's not-
closing the bathhouses was unnecessarily added.
Yes.
It said no rechitza.
Once you say, he says you'd be right if it said no'alim mitame by itself, that I had no proof about cold water. But if I told you no washing, and then I tell you lock the bathhouses, obviously lock the bath. There's no point in talking about locking the bathhouses because you already told me asur to wash. So if you told me don't wash and lock the bathhouse, you're telling me that when you said don't wash, you meant the type of washing that would occur
in the bathhouse.
in the locked bathhouse. And therefore, that's the proof. So the proof is not from the fact that a bathhouse is chamin.
Great one.
You understand? It's from the dual language. And this is, by the way, this happens all the time in contracts. When there's an extra clause that's added in. So if you look just at the clause doesn't prove anything. But if the clause is there and there's already something that would have included the clause, you prove from the fact that you didn't need the clause that the clause's intention was for this. That's what we just did in the Mishnah. Got it? Okay. So that was the second point that he said about a regular ta'anit, that it's mutar when it's cold water. Lema Messiah says the Gemara, let's learn now a proof, kol hayaveh tevilot, that whenever a person is obligated to go to the mikveh, tovelin kidarkan, they are allowed to dip kidarkan according to their way, and as they normally would, ben b'Tisha B'Av, ben b'Yom HaKippurim. Also on Yom Kippur. What is that? Now we're going hard. We're going hardcore now. Heavy duty. We're talking about not pushing off the obligation, the hayuv, to go to the mikveh. Okay? So we're not now talking about a person who's going to mikveh because heck, they want to go. They go every day. This is talking about a person whose date to be tovel comes now. Okay? So as an example, let's say the night for her tevilah comes out on then. Would she go to the mikveh on that day? Okay? Let's continue. Baby B'Tisha baby Yom HaKippurim. B'mai. Says the Gemara, in what? In what kind of an immersion are we talking about? In which kind of a mikveh? Ilem b'hamin. If you say that it's going in warm water, tevilah b'hamin mi'ika. Are they allowed to do a tevilah in Hamin, she'uvininu. It needs to be drawn from the water. So Hamin over here, the Gemara is assuming that we're talking about water that was immersed or that was heated
up.
in pots, in a cauldron. Okay, so the way you did that, it was much harder for them to do. We're not talking about a scenario where they had it. We'll see in just a minute, right? But the Gemara assumed that bathing in Hamin referred to where you heated the water, you drew, they used to call it drawing a bath, okay? Where they would heat the water up in a vessel, and then they would pour it in the mikveh. So the Gemara says, you're not allowed to dip in Mayim She'uvim. You know, this idea that a woman could go to the mikveh on vacation in the bathtub, no such thing. That water has no validity, don't matter how deep it is. Why?
Can't you heat it in an earthenware vessel?
What do you mean?
Can it be heated for the mikveh for the purpose?
Yeah, but the water was drawn. It was poured into a keli. It has to come rainwater.
But if it rainwater is into collected legally, according to.
So again, the assumption here is that tevilah v'hamin is referring to water the way that they would do it then, which was that they would fill the bore with water that was heated in a vessel. Okay, so the Gemara says that's sheuvin. You can't dip in it. What do you mean? No, the whole thing has to be rainwater.
The whole thing.
Then there's something called hashaka, but again, we're not going to get into the complicated laws of mikveh. They have a pipe between the things, but again, the water has to be ma'im she'uvim. Okay?
A certain amount.
Sorry?
A certain amount.
Yes, 40 sa'ah.
And then after that, you could fill it up with regular water.
Not so simple. Again, I don't want to go into the laws of mikveh. Laws of mikveh are very complicated. Okay? You know what's very interesting, by the way? They have mikvaot now. Oceans all rainwater.
Ocean can.
River, same thing. What's very interesting is that there's now a company that makes mikvaot, a do-it-yourself mikveh that you could build in your backyard. I think it's roughly about $3,000. So you have people who put mikvaot in their house, kosher mikveh in the house, because their wife is very germophobic. They don't want their wives or they don't want them to not go to the mikveh because of these issues. Or you have also scenarios where someone is very unhealthy. Someone is unfortunately not well. And the doctors are very nervous for them to go to a mikveh because of, God forbid, what they might pick up. They can't have completely sterile mikveh for them to go into. So they build their own. There's a company now that makes a mikveh that you could put in your backyard.
Will they take it from the gutters?
No, they have a whole system. Yeah. The thing clicks together like a piece of Lego. Okay? Wild. Rather, says the Gemara, lav, ela, lav bitzonan. We're talking about, aren't we talking about in cold water? V'chayeveh tevilot in, chayeveh tevilot inish achrina. No. The ones that are obligated in tevilah, okay, anyone who's mechuyav to do so, to do a tevilah for whatever reason, then they have the obligation to do so in cold water. Inish achrina lo. But another person is not allowed to do it even in cold water. Okay?
Can you say that again, Rabbi?
So the Gemara now is trying to prove this concept. Okay, that the Gemara brought from that a person who has an obligation to go to tevilah can do so on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur. Gemara says, "B'mai, what's it talking about? If it's talking about hot water, tevilah b'hamin mi'ika. There's no tevilah b'hamin because we're talking about hamin, hot water that was done in its ma'im she'uvim. It's gathered water. Rather, so what's the case? Elav b'tzonan. It's talking about in cold water, and still on that, the Braita is telling you chayavet tevilot in. Only the people that are allowed to do chayavet tevilot, they're allowed to go in cold water. But anybody else, inish achrina lo, no one else is allowed to go even in cold water. So now, let's just be clear. The first part of what Rav Chizda taught was kol shu mishum evel. Anytime you have a situation of avelut, of mourning, kigon Tisha B'Av or avelut. So Tisha B'Av or avelut, you're only allowed to go, as it said, asur be'mechamim be'mitzonan. You're not allowed, whether it's in warm or in hot, or in cold, whether it's in warm or hot, or even in cold. So the Gemara now brought a proof to that. Why? Because we learned in the words of the Braita, it says kol chayavet tevilot. Anyone who's hayav tevilah is tovelin kidarkam. They're allowed to dip according to their way. Ben b'Tisha B'Av, ben b'Yom Kippurim. They're allowed to do so. So if There's no option of them dipping in hot water because we don't have hot water which is kosher for a mikveh. So when the Mishnah told you that chayaveh tevilah are allowed on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur, and you're not talking about hot water, you're talking about cold water, and you said that the cold water people that are allowed to dip are only chayaveh tevilot, what does that prove? Someone who's not chayav tevilah cannot dip, and we're talking only about cold water. What does that prove? B'Av and Avel in cold water, if you're not chayaveh tevilot, boom! You see how we just erected this magnificent structure? So we prove the first concept of Rabbi Hizda that kol mishum b'shum evel is asur ben b'hamin ben b'tzonan, whether in warm or in cold.
I gotta tell you, if you ever told me something like you're not allowed to bathe or whatever the wording they use, and I said okay, I would never say is it hot or is it cold. It sounds like It sounds like just now when you were speaking about let me find a rabbi that says I could bathe in cold. Same thing.
No.
It says you're not allowed to bathe. You're not allowed to bathe, hot or cold, who cares?
So it's interesting what you're saying. Why? Because remember, they did not relate to bathing like we do. For them, bathing was an experience. Now you have a bath in your house. So when do you take a bath? When you just want to relax, you go take a bath, draw a bath. There, you had to go to the bathhouse. You were there all day. It was there was these hammams that they had. Those were their bathhouses. So bathing was an experience. They didn't wash every day. Right? They washed in a very different way to us. For us, if I told you rechitza, that washing was an extra, not a need, what would you all look at me like I'm crazy?
Istanis.
Right? So the Gemara says a person who needs to bathe, that guy's called an istanisa, like a person who's taking it very, he's over the top, he's very sensitive. Today, a normal person needs to bathe. Right? So their version of rechitza was very different to ours. Most of the people, they would not entertain bathing in cold water. That just was not on their radar. And by the way, as well, for many of us, how many of us in the winter take a bath, turn on the shower in the cold? Who does that? Anyone here?
In the winter?
Yeah, winter.
Turn cold shower?
Yeah, cold shower. It's freezing.
Yeah, but if you
Russians,
couldn't take a shower
Russians,
at all and it was
no
only
problem.
It's cold.
I went to this place, there's a Russian bathhouse. You ever go to a Russian bathhouse? Yeah. Shema Yisrael. Amazing. We gotta go. It's crazy. I'm not even sketching. It's called the banya or something. Banyas. What do they do? They take the leaves. You go into the place. They schwitz you up. They put you in a fur hat and a coat. Like I don't know. These Russians. They didn't know how to not be in fur coats and fur hats. You go into the steam room in a fur coat and a fur hat, and the guy tells you lie down over here. And in the steam room with all the steam in the thing, he takes a tree, he takes all the steam. What happens? The steam rises. He takes all the steam with the leaves on it. He brings the steam down on you, burning the skin off your back, and then while he's burning, he's beating you with the leaves. This is the beginnings of anti-Semitism. I asked the guy as he's beating me. I'm telling my friend, I was with my friend Johnny. I say, Johnny, we're paying for this. I could get this. We just go to Harlem. I say, I start screaming some inappropriate things. I'll get beaten for free, right?
That's crazy.
Wild. But you know what they do? They take you like this in the extreme heat. It brings all the toxins out of the blood. They're stimulating the skin so that all the toxins come out with the heat, with the beatings. It's not a beating, but they're hitting you with it. It's not easy, but it's not like they're hurting you. Then you come out, they take you directly from there, they stick you in an ice bath. All the words of Shema came out of my mouth. Inadvertently.
Wow.
Okay? But afterwards, they give you a shower, they do this, they have a scrub that they scrub you. I got home like a dead man.
Exhausted.
You go to sleep, you wake up, you feel like your whole body is awake and alive. Rechitza for them was an experience. It's not what we're talking about. It's not having a shower installed a second from your bed, roll out of bed into the shower. It's a very different thing that we're talking about. So therefore, when they said rechitza, what did they mean? Okay? Let's carry on.
That explains.
Amar, you got it?
Yeah.
So they weren't arguing the rabbi, they were just trying to find the definition of the word. Amar Rav Chana bar Katina. Rav Chana bar Katina comes and he says, Lo nitzrecha, We did not need that beraita that you just built your whole tower of proof upon. Lo nitzrecha ela lechamet Tveria. So we just started that and said the only way to have chamin is if it's sheuvin, and therefore you can't even dip in that water. That's not an option. We must be talking about cold water. We only allowed cold water for tevilah. So therefore you learn no. Says the Gemara, what if I found you hot water effectively, which was not sheuv, which was not drawn? What's an example? Chamet Tveria. The hot waters of Tveria is a hot water spring. It's all natural, all came from the heavens. You're allowed to dip in that water. So there in Chamet Tveria, right, the Gemara was telling you, the Mishnah was telling you, that only someone is obligated to dip is allowed to dip. But a person that's not obligated to dip, they're not allowed to dip. But we're talking about hot water too. So you have no proof with regards to cold water. What would have been another way to knock out the Gemara? To have a bathhouse that had underwater, underfloor heating. Or they had some sort of system where the water was not drawn. Right? But remember, you have to understand there was the limitations of the day. Okay? Let's carry on. Ihachi, says the Gemara, Ihachi, we're going to finish off, I think we have to finish off with this revision. Ihachi, if that's the case, and we're only talking about the hot water, emasefa. So you just try to wriggle out of this by making it about hot water. The Gemara says, Ihachi, if that's the case, let's look at the end of the Braita. End of the Braita says, Amar Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Hanina says, Sgan Kohanim, who, Sgan Kohanim means he was in charge of all the Kohanim. He was second in command. He was the understudy for the Kohen Gadol. If the Kohen Gadol became Tameh on Yom Kippur, who would come in? The deputy. What would happen? He said, Sefa. Let's look at the Sefa. Amar Rabbi Hanina said, Kohen Gadol, Kedayu bet Elohenu, le'abed alav tevilah. Right? The Bet HaMikdash is kedai, it's chashuv enough, le'abed alav tevilah, to lose a tevilah, an obligation to do a tevilah, pam achat bashana, once a year. What that means is that he's saying, if after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, we're in such avelut, that even if you have an obligation to be tovel, it's your time to go to the mikveh from Nida, tough. The avelut of the Beit HaMikdash is so important that if it means that you lose the tevilah, fine, you lose the tevilah. What can we do? Pam achad b'shana. V'i amid betzonan mutar. So if that's the case, i'am betzonan mutar, yirhatz betzonan. Says the Gemara, okay, you got me. Maybe the Mishnah in the beginning could be talking about hot water. But the end of the Mishnah, he says, no, I disagree that anyone's allowed to dip on Tisha B'Av. Well, if they have an obligation. I hold that the Beit HaMikdash is worthwhile enough that they're not allowed to do rechitza, and if it means they lose their thing, fine. That's what it means to be an avelut for the Beit HaMikdash. It says the Gemara, if tzonan was an option, why would they lose their tevilah? Tevilah could be done in tzonan. It's just rechitza that's not relevant for tzonan. It's not an option. Okay? So therefore, wash yourself with cold water. Amar Papa says, Be'atra delo shechiach tzonan. We're talking about a place where there isn't a cold water that's available. So therefore, if we're talking about a scenario of hot water, so the Tanakama, the beginning of the Mishnah that says that you're allowed, that you have your immersion in its time, allows a tevilah in the hot water, right? When it comes to Rabbi Chanina says, even though it's allowed, I hold for the sake of the kavod of the Beit HaMikdash, you shouldn't do it. But both of them really agree that using cold water is mutar for everybody, and therefore you can't prove or you can't disprove from this Mishnah, because really it could be going either way. We're going to continue Be'ezrat Hashem from the continuation of the Gemara. I would normally like to get to the end of this point so we don't have to reintroduce it next time, but it goes back and forth a few times before we still finish this, and we've already done about an hour. So we're going to finish here. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.